The moderator of the panel, Ms. Yaroslava Johnson. She is President and CEO of Western NIS Enterprise Fund. Western NIS Enterprise Fund is also a co-organizer of Ukraine House Davos, and Yaroslava is a member of the organizing committee.
Thank you, Alexa. I ask the panelists to come on stage. Okay, please. Yulia, please, here. Okay. Hello, Professor Stiglitz. Come on in right here. Welcome. Okay, okay. Torben, Yuri. Okay. Sit down. I'm pleased to welcome all of you to today's panel, the $1 trillion bill, economists weigh in on rebuilding Ukraine. The goal of the panel is to discuss the challenges and considerations to rebuilding Ukraine after the war. And we have a stellar panel for you today. On my far right is Torben Becker, economist and director of the Stockholm School Institute of Transition Economics. Professor Becker, educated at Stockholm School of Economics, has worked and published policy reports in Ukraine. Next to him is Yulia Svyrydenko, Quantich Presidential Professor of Economics at the University of California, Berkeley. He's educated at Ukraine's Kyiv-Mohyla Academy University and the University of Michigan. And Professor Svyrydenko is a prolific researcher and writer on Ukraine's economy. Then comes Jean Lang, an international finance and development consultant who designed the successful multi-year $270 million Bosnia reconstruction finance facility and related comprehensive technical assistance. Ms. Lang has worked in Ukraine on development and finance projects. Then comes Joseph Stiglitz, an American economist and professor of economics at Columbia University, recipient of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Science in 2001. Professor Stiglitz was also Senior Vice President and Chief Economist of the World Bank and former chairman of the U.S. Council of Economic Advisor. Next to me is Yulia Svyrydenko, the first Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine and Minister of Economy of Ukraine, is also an economist and has extensive experience in regional administrations. Let me tell you why I'm interested in this particular panel, this discussion. I am head of Western NIS Enterprise Fund, which was created and funded by the US government in 1994 with the mission of building Ukraine's market economy and by fostering growth in small and medium businesses. For the subsequent 28 years, we fulfilled this mission steadily, contributing to improvement of Ukraine's market economy, investing $186 billion in SMEs, providing livelihood for over 30,000 citizens, spinning off a venture capital fund, and contributing to the development of business climate that attracted over $2 billion to the region. In 2015, we expanded to provide technical assistance to Ukraine in the form of export promotion, local economic development, impact investing, as well as economic leadership. There were hiccups and delays along the way as we fulfilled our mission, but on the whole, we were successful. We accomplished a lot. And our mission is not completed in February 24th of this year. There was still much to do, but work came to a halt as Russians started to shell Ukrainian cities. For the past 90 days, we and the rest of the world watched as Ukrainian cities were devastated, and most of us could not imagine how and when they could possibly be rebuilt. Yet yesterday, the mayors of Bucha and Chernihiv came up to me at this forum and asked me and told me that they had cleaned up virtually all the debris in their towns and they were willing to rebuild the economy. What can I do to help them? And I heard today that even the mayor of Mariupol, Vadim Boychenko, is already creating a plan for rebuilding Mariupol once it's freed from Russian occupation. So it raises a lot of questions. How do you start? Where do you start? What do we do? And what are we going to accomplish? And how long it's going to take? So let's get started. Torben, you know, you're the lead guy here. You were working on a team with other economists. Let me tell you who they were. Make sure I know, don't forget anybody. There is Yulia Svyrydenko is right next to you. There is Barry Eichengreen, Sergei Guriev, Simon Johnson, Timofey Milovanov, Kenneth Rogoff, and Beatrice Wetter-Demaro. And all of you developed a blueprint for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Many of us have only heard about it indirectly. Perhaps you could explain what the genesis was of this blueprint and what you included in it, what was important to do.
Thank you, Yaroslava, and of course, thank you for inviting me to this discussion here today, and to everyone here at the Ukraine House in Davos. A first small note to this report is that Yuri got all of us engaged in this project, and this was written almost 2 months ago now, well before I think most people would have started to think about the whole reconstruction process. But the thought here was really to get this process going and having something that we can discuss with key stakeholders, with you here today, politicians in our respective countries, both in Ukraine, I'm from Sweden, in the EU, etc. So the background was really to have a good plan that can sort of set the stage for a more general discussion and take up some things that we think would be important in the process of this reconstruction of Ukraine. So, I mean, I think the report contains a lot of different things. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we estimate costs and where those numbers come from, and how we see the reconstruction in different phases. And then Yuri will cover the more interesting institutional setups and who is going to be doing what in this process as far as we outline it in the report. But again, please remember this was written quite a few months ago. Things have happened, but I think this can still serve as a starting point for some discussion. So that's how I would introduce the report. Let me then start to the title of the talk we're having here. The $1 trillion is sort of the title here. If we start at more modest estimates, we saw here the numbers. Damaged infrastructure, I think, was cited here at $63 billion US. The Kiev School of Economics, where both Yuri and I myself have been engaged in for many years, their latest update on this number is a bit more than $95 billion US. And then we're just thinking about infrastructure that has actually been documented and collected. So they don't just grab a number out of thin air, they actually count the residential buildings, the roads, the cars, all of these things that we can put a reasonable price tag on at least to arrive at this number. So I would say we can think of this as the $100 billion sort of part where we are at now. But remember that for every day that this war goes on, we're going to add several billion US worth of damage to just infrastructure. So that's sort of that number in perspective. When you start to talk about the $1 trillion question, you need to think about everything else that is lost or destroyed in a war like this. So, of course, when we start to think about Ukraine losing maybe half of its GDP in this year, that in itself would correspond to roughly $100 billion extra if you think about what GDP numbers were before the war. So, you know, that's another big number to keep in mind. Then, of course, we have seen all the pictures. It's not only buildings that are destroyed, lives and people's relatives, families, etc. Putting a number on this, someone else has to come up with that number. I cannot really put my head around that, but it's certainly a big number. But so if we think about then how should we come to the next stage where we know that parts of Ukraine we are already cleaning up sort of some of the war damages and we need to get the reconstruction process going. What we have in this report is that we look at several stages of reconstruction and actually starting already today and doing some emergency responses already while the war is going on. So I mean we cannot forget about the fact that the war is going on, so we need to focus now on all of the medical, food, fuel, all of these emergency responses should be part of what the international community can contribute with. And then in the next step, we're thinking about rapid reconstruction of critical infrastructure. We all understand that you need your roads, your your hospitals, your water facilities, all of these things that make a country run. We need to get that in place, and that's probably going to be another, 6 months to 2 years, just getting some of this critical infrastructure back. And then, of course, when we look ahead, it's really about rebuilding better in Ukraine and creating sort of a better and more modern infrastructure for Ukraine to be part of, this European transformation that we're looking forward to, and thinking about reconstruction, not only about infrastructure, but about institutions and technologies to help sort of this green transition and all of these other things that we think are going to be important in the future of Ukraine. So I'll probably stop there, so I'm not taking too much of the time here.
Ukraine was damaged in different ways in different parts of the country. The East was, Ukraine was damaged in different ways in different parts of the country. The East was more devastated, and Central, the West was somewhat damaged. Is there any way this reconstruction plan has to be phased or staged from one part of the country to the other, or what's your vision on that?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's also part of the report, that of course, in the western parts, further away from the front line, more of this reconstruction can start now. We can also think about, people have been relocated within the country, building housing for people in safer places as a first response, and then thinking about what can we do as we move closer to the front line. Because as we all know, there's going to be more intensive fighting still in some regions, but in other regions we can certainly move in and do a little bit of more long-term thinking already now.
Okay, good, thank you. Yuri, it's clear that the effort to rebuild is going to take some time, especially to create the foundations for a free and prosperous Ukraine that's free of its Soviet baggage, which to this day, until the war still existed. How do you envision this happening, and what do you think is the way that should be organized?
Thank you. That's a terrific questions, and I would like to echo what Toby said earlier today, that it was a collective effort to write this report. Many people contributed, and I was just one of many people who did this report. Well, we saw huge damage. It's really heartbreaking, and we have to ask ourselves two questions. One is how we're going to get money, and the next panel is going to elaborate on this. I'll just say, we have several sources potentially. One is bilateral aid. We know that the US government, the EU government are willing to contribute very significant sums of money to reconstruct Ukraine. Already we've heard that European Union is willing to pay for the majority of the cost. Hopefully this is going to come along. We also have potential funding from multilateral financial institutions. Think about the World Bank, the IMF, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the European Investment Bank. These institutions can give us loans, they can give us technical assistance. That's a great source of knowledge and funding, but we should understand that these institutions should not be leading the reconstruction of Ukraine. A, because they focus on loans. This is not a great source of funding for a country that is destroyed in this war. And B, some of the shareholders for these institutions are not really particularly interested in making Ukraine a success story. And so we should not rely on the World Bank or the IMF as being a committed agent interested in rebuilding Ukraine. We also have private funding, which is available to Ukraine. We know Ukrainian diaspora played a very important role. Many people donated very generously to the Ukrainian causes, and I hope this flow of resources will continue in the foreseeable future when we need to rebuild hospitals, schools, roads, and so on. We also have a potential to get seize Russian assets. I'm not sure about how the legal structure of this is going to play out, but potentially there is a path to get access to those resources. And also there may be an ongoing reparation-like payment when, again, if we use history as a precedent, when we look at reparations made by Iraq to Kuwait, there was a tax on Iraqi exports, and this tax was going on for 30 years, and cumulatively Iraq paid $50 billion to Kuwait. And Kuwait was a very rich country, much smaller than Ukraine. Now, once we secure funding, and hopefully we get there, Then the question is, how are we going to spend this money? And Minister Kuleba this morning said coordination is the #1 thing we should do. I totally agree with him. This is what we emphasize in the report, that coordination is going to be really critical. We have very diverse sources of funding. We have very diverse needs. We have to aggregate this information somehow, make sure we avoid duplication of efforts, avoid waste. It has to be one agency which is going to manage this money. Another key principle we emphasize in our report is that aid has to be rapid but conditional. Rapid because we see that there is a humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine. We have to help people immediately, as fast as possible, ASAP. But as we progress in the reconstruction of Ukraine, it's going to be important that Ukraine stays on script, sticks to a plan. You do A, you get money. You get B, you get money. You do C, you get money. So this conditionality is very important for multi-year planning to make sure that we execute the plan and actually reconstruct Ukraine rather than spend money on some pet projects. We also argue in this report that it is critical to rely on grants rather than loans. If we get loans to rebuild Ukraine, at some point we're going to have a debt sustainability issues. We're already in a big problem now, but going forward it's going to be even harder. If you think about the Marshall Plan for Europe after World War II, 90% of aid from the US was in the form of grants. Only 10% was loans. We hope that a similar financing structure is going to be applied to Ukraine. Now, who is going to do this? In our report, we suggest that it should be a self-standing EU-affiliated agency. It's going to be a new agency to make sure that there is no bureaucracy, no red tape. We're going to have people who are really motivated in rebuilding Ukraine. Why does it have to be EU-affiliated? Well, because Ukraine wants to be a part of the EU. EU seems to be open to accepting Ukraine as the country. And ultimately, we want to make sure that Ukraine is going to be aligned as much as possible with the European Union in terms of institutions, legal structure. Ukraine needs to attract FDI, foreign direct investment. If we have this institutional anchor coming from the European Union, this is going to be a much more credible exercise. And remember, we can't rely just on government money to rebuild Ukraine. We have to attract private sources. And these guys have to have some type of assurance that Ukraine is an investable place, that their rights are going to be protected. The most important part is that Ukraine has to own this reconstruction. So if we rebuild, something in Bucha, or in Irpin, it's not because some donor wants to spend money there. It has to come from the mayor who says, look, we want to own this bridge. We need this bridge because ultimately this aid is going to be withdrawn. And we have to sustain this bridge on our own. And there is a variety of ways how we can achieve this. We propose joint decision making. So, it's not just, the European Union that is going to run the show. It has to be a joint exercise between Ukrainian stakeholders and also the European Union. It should be matching funds so that the Ukrainians have skin in the game. They want to make sure that this money is put to good use. It has to be decentralization to some extent at least, that, mayors of the city say, I need a bridge, I need a school. And so these needs are going to be reflected in the funding and projects that are going to be funded and supported by this reconstruction effort. Another thing I want to emphasize, and this is the last point, is that we should not try to rebuild Ukraine the way it was before the war. We need to deeply modernize the country. And by modernization, I mean not only a new infrastructure, it's also institutions. We have to utilize the best technologies today. For example, the green technologies Toby mentioned earlier. Why is that? Well, it's important not only for fighting climate change, it's also important for achieving energy independence of Ukraine. We don't want to rely on Russian energy going forward. And this is great, this is a great opportunity to reinvent the country. Maybe it will be all digital, as we saw yesterday, but hopefully we'll have some real change on the ground as well.
Thank you, Yuri. Jean, you had practical experience with the only European post-war reconstruction since the Marshall Plan. And you were instrumental in designing the Bosnian Reconstruction Finance Facility. And I guess you were oriented more on the private sector. Right. But can you tell us why that vehicle was chosen and why that was an important way to start in Bosnia? Of course, Bosnia is a smaller country, but
I guess in the context of a lot of discussion here, reconstruction probably is not the right word, because it was a $268 million lending program, a grant to the government of Bosnia, deposited in a dollar account in the US, and served also as balance of payment support, a US pledge, part of the IMF requirements to build up monetary reserves. So the main goal of the facility was to provide immediate liquidity to the economy through funds channeled through the banking system to the commercial and industrial sectors in support of, I was going to say, and I just scratched it out, reconstruction. How about economic revitalization, and particularly immediately to create jobs for returning refugees, demobilizing soldiers, and the general population. That's written into everything. I'm quoting from all of the documents. And to do this with transparency and accountability. So there are a lot of features of this program that may seem intrusive and may not be needed in Ukraine, because post-war Bosnia in 1996 was just at the beginning of the economic transformation to a market economy. And the banking system was fragile, is an understatement. It was basically insolvent and illiquid. Huge problem loans, and staffed by people who had never made loans looking at credit risk. So what did we do to meet these constraints and challenges? The first thing we did was to confirm that the banks were in such bad shape, and a team in January of 1996, Dayton was signed in December of 1995, a team of US bank regulators with great recent experience in the S&L crisis went and looked at 8 to 10 Bosnian banks chosen in conjunction with the World Bank and others to confirm what shape they were in, and confirmed everything I just said. So the decision was made to set up what became known as an on-lending management unit at the National Bank of Bosnia, and all the credit decisions were made by these expat bankers who staffed it, mostly Americans at the time, but it morphed, and local Bosnian staff. But of course, they had no idea about the Bosnian commercial or business landscape. So the banks really played an integral role as agents. They brought their customers, old or new, to the on-lending management, and they made all the lending decisions. And the banks were agents. They got paid fees for loan origination, for monitoring the loans and connecting the loans. And in terms of accountability, there was a concurrent audit that the banks that were eligible to participate, and they had to meet certain conditions to participate, and the enterprises agreed to be audited on a regular basis. And that was done through a USAID contract with an accounting firm. And you probably won't be surprised to learn that, guess what? There was evidence of fraud and insider lending, but it was caught really quickly, therefore building confidence that this program could actually achieve its objectives to revitalize the private sector, get the economy going again, and get job creation. And I'm sorry to use notes, but I did this 25 years ago, and it's not totally fresh in my head. So the program was designed, approved by USAID, and the Congress had to appropriate the funds, and became operational in 6 months, which is pretty good. And it had the full support of the Bosnian government. 3 years later, 425 loans had been made worth $141 million, creating or sustaining over 15,000 new jobs. At the end of the program, 3 years later, more loans had been made 35,000 jobs sustained or created. But according to an audit of the program, the firms that got loans accounted for 50% of Bosnian exports, and Minister Kuleba was talking about the importance of exports. So, and then the other thing is the facility was both transactional, getting the money out to the economy quickly, but also focused on economic governance and capacity building in government institutions, participating banks, and enterprises. So, for example, there was lots of training at the participating banks. Not sure that would be necessary in Ukraine. The program helped set up a bank regulatory and work for it, and borrowing enterprises got lots of assistance to rebuild their supply chains, to find new markets, domestic and external, because everything had been disrupted during the war. Trying to think of some other aspects that might be, I know, one of the important things, Dayton mandated that a currency board be set up in Bosnia, and the Deutschmark became the currency. That meant lending was in Deutschmark at a commercial rate, Deutschmark LIBOR plus 400 basis points. But in Ukraine, if the lending would be in hryvnia, there would be an interest rate issue for borrowing enterprises. So that's just something to think about. The other thing is the terms of the loan, 1 to 3 years, and the target, I should mention, the target market was, of course, small and medium enterprises, near and dear to USAID's heart. But in the design of the program, since job creation was extremely important, we decided to be non-ideological and practical, and we lent to state-owned enterprises during the first couple of years, because they were the ones that could employ the most amount of people or re-employ people. But they had, the only state-owned enterprises that got loans had to show some sort of commercial viability. And then, do I have one more second? One of the interesting things is many of the state-owned enterprises decided they did not have to repay their loans, because why would they have to repay their loans? And we got agreement with the government to sue them in criminal court, and we won, which sent there's a good side to this story of they're not paying, which sent a good message that if you borrow money, you have to repay if you can.
Jean, are there any lessons you think you can draw from the Bosnian experience that Ukraine could maybe apply to Ukraine? I know the size.
Well, I think the size is different, but like in terms of returning refugees, the percentage of the population, maybe even more in Bosnia, that were refugees, because it's a smaller country and everybody became displaced during the fighting. But I think flexibility in design, we were constantly looking at it and changing. When could we stop lending to the state-owned enterprise? When could we focus on small and medium enterprises? How to really help them through technical assistance and the legal and regulatory framework.
Thank you. Professor Stiglitz, you've heard all of this, and you have a long experience in the World Bank. How do we handle this now? How do we jumpstart the economy? How do we work through all of this?
It's really hard.
It is hard, yes.
It's very hard. And let me begin with just a remark. Wars are expensive. And, I've always, when the United States got into the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, which was a war of our choice, I said, that was really foolish. And I wrote a book called The $3 Trillion War. It was really, we chose that title because we didn't want to seem to be exaggerating. The true cost was well over $3 trillion. And that was the cost of the United States, not to Iraq and Afghanistan, if we had added those numbers in. Just to mention one number which highlights, if you ask how much is the U.S. going to pay for the health care of the U.S. returning soldiers, troops, it's about $1 trillion. So just for the healthcare and of the people who've been traumatized, destroyed, losing limbs and all that, it's $1 trillion. So that gives you these numbers of $1 trillion bill. To me, are
Not too large.
not too large. I mean, now the other point that's already been mentioned, but President Biden, in trying to talk about getting out of COVID-19, coined the slogan "Build Back Better," and I think that is part of what you've talked about, and has to be part of what the agenda is. Particularly because Ukraine was not fully through the transition from the Soviet era to a modern market economy. There were a number of institutional problems. You still don't have a competitive economy didn't have in many dimensions. I won't say too much about the oligarchs, some of whom are floating around here. I don't know if they're in this room, but and some of them who've used their money well, but I suspect not all of them. So there are, when the transition from communism to a market economy began, I emphasized a lot what I call the soft infrastructure. The institutional infrastructure, making sure that you had good competition laws, corporate governance laws, a whole set of laws. And I think many of the failures in that transition were because there was a blind faith that if you just privatized, you would wind up with a market economy. And what I pointed out was, people like Rockefeller were not the strongest advocates for competition laws. You create an oligarchy, and the political dynamics make creating a vibrant market economy more difficult. So I think this is a chance to think intimately as you think about the hard infrastructure, the visibility of which is so clear. Also to think about the less visible soft infrastructure, and I'm glad in your report you talked about that. Some aspects of this transition are a transition that all of our societies are going through. The green transition, the digital transition, transition from a manufacturing economy to a service sector economy. And these are hard transitions for any economy. I mean, you look at the political discord in the United States or in certain countries in Western Europe, it has to do with the difficulties that these transitions always have. Now, obviously, one doesn't like to have one's transition forced upon one in exactly the way that it has been forced by these events. But one needs to seize this as an opportunity and say, okay, now we have to make that transition, and how do we go about integrating the building back the infrastructure, and soft and hard infrastructure, in ways that support the green transition. The point that you're weaning yourself off of Russian oil is an example. I argued in a book I wrote in 2006 that it was a big mistake for Europe to become as dependent on Russian gas and oil. To me, even at that time, it was obvious that Russia was not a stable country that you could rely on. And why would you put so many eggs in that particular basket? Unfortunately, Europe didn't pay attention to what I wrote, and now we're seeing the consequence. But a more general point is, as variable as the weather is, it's more reliable than autocratic leaders. And most of the oil is in the hand, fossil fuels are in the hands of authoritarian governments, whether they're in the Middle East or in Russia. And economists refer to this as the natural resource curse. There's a whole theory about why that is so, but it is the reality. And so the argument for moving to renewable energy is, I think, compelling. And the good news is that in the last 10 years, the price of renewables has come down so dramatically that it's actually even more as efficient as using the old fossil fuels. There are just a couple of other points I want to make. One of them is, there's reference to the enormous downturn in the destruction of GDP this year. Whenever you have that kind of economic downturn, restarting the economy is difficult. We've been talking about how COVID-19, we shut down the economy and we're trying to restart it, and we're getting all kinds of supply side interruptions. I think one has to think about, as you think about your reconstruction plan, to think about how that will play out. That the normal, the market economy works well when things work well and makes good adjustments from year to year, but it's terrible in moments of massive reconstruction or massive restructuring or in restarting. And our market economy isn't doing very well in the United States in trying to restart from COVID-19, even though that's a much smaller disturbance than what you've been through. So I think one has to be attentive to the limitations, or the challenges maybe that you will have to face as you try to restart the economy. And that includes what's happened to the financial institutions. People who borrow money are not going to be repaying it. Some of them, just if they're not in the country, their businesses have been destroyed. There's going to be a very significant problem to your financial.
So even banks that were viable before the war are now going to have bad debt, and they'll have to do something with the bad debt before they could be healthy again. And
you have to look at that as a systemic problem as part of the reconstruction, and that's an example of an institutional problem that is created by a 50% reduction in GDP. And the longer the war goes on, obviously, the more serious that is. The same thing in the agricultural sector. There's been, in certain parts of the country, massive disturbances. Firms will be out of business. You have to add, even something, quote, as simple as agriculture, there are supply side chain problems. You have to get credit to the farmers. You have to get fertilizer. Oh, you have to get fertilizer to the farmers. You have to, they need critical inputs. And you can imagine in more complicated products, how many more inputs. So one has to think as you emerge from the war, restarting the economy is going to be a challenge, and you'll have to think about that. A couple other maybe smaller points, or important. Trying to design programs that reconstruction, infrastructure programs, any of that kind. There are a whole variety of concerns. On the one hand, you don't want waste and fraud. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, speed is important. If you don't have water, if your water, as one example, if waterworks have been destroyed and people can't get water and they're going to be dying from disease, you ask, is it better to make sure that every box has been checked, that it's it's more important to get something done quickly, and you make trade-offs. When we responded to COVID-19 in United States and Western Europe, the decision was made that it was more important to get money out to protect the vulnerable people than to make sure the program was designed perfectly. and the programs were not designed perfectly. Europe did better than the United States, but in that debate, we pushed for what we thought were good design, and in the end, we said it's more important to compromise and get the money out rather than have people starve. I mean, it was really that simple. Now, emerging from this war, you'll face a number of problems exactly of that kind. So what I want to urge is you want accountability, but you don't want excessive conditionality. And where in that how you get the right balance is really, really hard. But let me say that I think you do need to think about excessive conditionality, because that will undermine the ability to implement a program quickly. And you have to have some way of combining that with adequate accountability.
I think we have to go on to the next speaker. Okay. Yulia, you've heard everyone talk about the plan, the reconstruction, and the future. How do you see Ukraine? What's Ukraine's role in all of this?
Okay, so I will be, very briefly and very shortly. So first of all, thank you for this opportunity to talk during this panel. And I would start with the words that army win the battles, but economy, plays the key role in winning the war in general. That's why it's so important. It's so vital for us to have this economic support from our partners, and that's why we're here. We're talking about what kind of support we can achieve, how we can work out this recovery plan. So that's why I would stress on several things, because I have too many things to comment on, because we learned a lot about blueprint. So we discussed it internally with our ministers. First of all, I would say that before the war, we estimate for ourselves that we need to make this jump to the level of Poland, like in 3 decades. Now we fully understand that it should take us less than 1 decade to achieve all our goals and indicators. And how we can do it? First of all, I think that it's full membership to EU, and we insist on that. There are some opinion from politicians, European one, that it can be other status. We shouldn't be candidate till the end of June, but we insist that we should obtain this full membership. As we're fighting, not only for Ukraine, we're fighting for democracy as the main value of EU in general. Second thing is full access to G7 and EU markets. So I think it's essential for us. We need to have this opportunity to export our goods. And we're very thankful for that fact that EU, UK, United States, they made this first step for lifting the tariff for Ukrainian goods. Of course, we want to prolong it more than for 1 year, of course. Second thing, it's transfer of technology, because you're absolutely right. We need to, I like this word, to revitalize the economy. So to not to reconstruct, but to revitalize, it means to build it absolutely on the new base, like a green base, and to build with a new technology, with a new approach. And the transfer of technology can give us opportunity to move further with another speed. Of course, we would like to be focused on sectors that previously were good enough structured in Ukraine. Definitely IT. It's rapidly grows. Even during this war, IT sector can keep 95% of their contracts. Second thing, I think it's agricultural sector. No doubt that we're leaders in this, but of course we need further. We need to go deeply to processing. As you know, with the situation with the blocks of the seaports, we understand that we need to find the way how to decrease the volume of import, but not losing the value of import, of export. And that's why it's extremely important to go deeply to processing. And we have ambitions to be the country that will provide a food safety for the whole world. Even during the first days of the war, we were absolutely sure that the growing season are going to be collapsed. But how surprised it was when we understand that all arable land was used by our farmers, and we're totally now prepared to feed Ukraine and definitely prepared to feed the world. Just need to unblock the Black Sea is essential things that we need to solve even during these days. We have many discussions with our partners how to make it this green corridor, how to provide us with a military convoy, how to provide us with this opportunity to export, because we're export-oriented country. The third thing, I think it's steel industry, and it should be rebuilt on a green base, that's for sure. And I think that you might not agree with me, I've heard it, but I think military is important for us. During the first day, it seems for us that we were alone, and we understand that we need to develop this industry to ensure ourselves, because being Ukraine and having this kind of neighbor, it's always risk. So that's why and we will face this risk during the next, I think, 20, 30 decades. That's why I think the security question is going to be number one, and it goes through all industries. And probably it's, yeah, I know that you might disagree, but Ukraine might be kind of European Israel. And it's our new reality. That's why military sector is important one. So of course we should provide, as you said, Ukraine should be investable country. So we need to provide a proper tax system. I think proper, I mean predictable tax system. We should provide proper development of the soft institution that is not the less important than building physical, to make a physical reconstruction itself. And of course, I think that we can provide quick logistic and affordable energy for attracting investment to Ukraine. So that's why I think that the main points that we just have in our minds and that we discuss internally. And of course, we're working on this reconstruction plan. And if you don't mind, I also will ask concerning the stages that might be implemented right now. So first is, I think, early stage. We already start to implement the early stage because we need to return our people back, and we need to create conditions for them to return back. First of all, it's to rebuild or to reconstruct their houses, that's for sure. Of course, you also raised the question where we should start. We should start with the cities that are already released, with the city that is not on the front line and released. So I think that Bucha, Irpin, Kostomel, all Chernigiv, so they are ready to start this reconstruction, early reconstruction, to return our refugees. I don't like this word refugees, because 96% of Ukrainians that are living abroad, they want to return back home. So it's not refugees, it's temporarily displaced people, but they want to return back home. So this early stage have already started. You're absolutely right that, Yulia, that it should go from down to up. So the initiative mayors and sitting governors, regional state administrators, they should work out plans and apply to World Bank, IFS, some private investment to invest this kind of project. But I think that with the governmental support, that is also important because we can provide with a proper frame of this cooperation. So that's why for economic front, I think it's not less essential than a military front. And if we increase the economic support of Ukraine and increase, the sanction against Russia, so we will definitely win. And I think that, you showed very heartbreaking movie, but I would like to say to all in this audience, and I think to all people in Ukraine, so we will win, and we will reconstruct everything, both physical and like a soft reconstruction, both of them.
I have one question about how you will coordinate all of this, because obviously I understand how having the cities apply for individual assistance, do their own plans, but will there be a coordination? Most cities, I know Bucha and Geneva may not be able to apply to the World Bank for loans, so someone has to coordinate.
Yes, that's why I absolutely agree that our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kuleba, absolutely right, that the main thing right now on the stage is to have the proper coordination of all these movements. That's why we are ready, like a government, to provide the proper coordination, because we have this discussion with our partners, and they're willing to help. Now we need to direct it in the proper way.
Now, the EU announced last week that they were going to do a Ukraine reconstruction plan, and they were going to work with you on it. Have you read it? Do you think that falls into what you have in mind?
Actually, we discussed the details. Of course, I understand that they also focus on some project management, and they would like to focus on some, early stage. Of course, it can be bridges, of course, it can be houses, but in general, so we discussed now the details, and I think that fact that our city mayors of Bucha, Gostomel, Chernihiv here in Davos, and taking place in this discussion, it's also really efficient for them. So to understand how they should move further, like, from the practical side.
Thank you. We have room for questions, I think. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Oh, yes, please.
One thing. When Mr. Stiglitz was talking about the state of the banking and financial system, I don't think I was clear enough. No credit risk was put on the banks in this program. And it may be something important, at least in the early stages, that banks don't take credit risk if they already have a lot of non-performing loans. And also a lot of the technical assistance given was to help, in Bosnia, was to help with working out non-performing loans where possible. So that's just something to think about in the early stages. If you want to use the banks, get them back up to speed, a diagnostic may need to be done to see if they can take the credit risk for the typical on-lending programs, or if they may need a grant program like this where there's no credit risk taken early on.
Thanks, Jean. Anyone has a question, please?
First of all, thank you for this panel. It seems to me that this topic is extremely important, and I wanted to ask you one thing, because it takes time to rebuild. We have 8 million people internally displaced who are already located in the western and central Ukraine. So it seems to me that the speed is extremely important. So I'm asking, the support of the government also to talk about those cities which are safe now. We have a lot of people, and we are able to create jobs in that cities at the moment. And we are, from Private Renovation in Ivano-Frankivsk, we are already doing that, and we are ready for cooperation, collaboration, and we are actively engaging with the City Council. Thank you.
Actually, as I told you, so we're absolutely ready to start the recovery right now, and we already just make some working plans and engineering projects because it's, the question number one, from economic point of view, from human point of view, because from economic side, there's 8 people, it's a labor that need to return back because we need our economy run. It might sound like a miracle, but it's interesting that all like essential systems are still operating in the proper way. Banking system are working, IT, retail chains, but we need more. So that's why, yes, we already started, and of course we understand that these people are located and they're ready to work. That's why we need to create as fast as possible all conditions, physical conditions for them to ensure them, to give them safety and to give the proper life conditions.
So you're now requiring for the war to end to be able to start reconstruction and rebuilding?
Yeah. So we actually applied on this meeting, on these panels with our colleagues, because they were, they had that attitude that let's wait until some documents will be signed, and then we will start. We said when we need immediate reaction, and that's why for this one, of course, there is country risk. We understand it perfectly well, but we're ready to make this early recovery, and we're trying to involve them in this early recovery, not to wait until some kind of documents will be signed.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? There's a question in the back. Would someone give the microphone to that person?
Я вас вітаю. Я думаю, що буде великою повагою до української нації, якщо я українською задам вам питання. Візьметься хтось перекладати? Хтось, якщо я. Да, дякую.
So, if I may, out of respect to the Ukrainian nation, I will ask a question to you in Ukrainian.
Пані Юля, скажіть, будь ласка, ви побачили, які права і можливості мають люди?
Miss Yulia, please tell me, you see what rights and opportunities people have.
Можу, так. Ви бачили, які права і можливості мають люди тут в Швейцарії, як вони вирішують своє життя, як вони відносяться до того, як облаштуватися. Ми маємо зараз таку ж тенденцію, нам треба облаштовуватись, поновляти все. Як ви думаєте, отримують в Україні громада, люди безпосередньо напряму можливість впливати на те, як вони хочуть відродитися і що вони хочуть зробити? Звичайно, треба все побудувати, накормити, відлікувати всіх там і так далі, але вибрати сенси подальшого життя. Зможуть вони це зробити без якоїсь вертикалі чи без якогось плану Маршала? Бо Маршал жив давно, він вже помер, і це минуле, а нам потрібне майбутнє. Дякую.
Okay, I'll put it briefly for you to understand. So the question was, you have seen how Swiss community has a right and opportunity to influence their life and the way they settle down. Do you think that the Ukrainian community has right, the direct opportunity to influence the way they build, recover, to find new senses without a clear vertical and without a clear Marshall Plan, because Mr. Marshall has died long ago. So thank you for your answer.
Якщо можна, ви знаєте, зараз країна працює над цим документом, над цим планом Маршала, я не хочу так називати, а планом відновлення, recovery України. І задача основна для того, щоб написати цей план, для того, щоб його обговорити з суспільством, ми залучили максимальну кількість і громади, і міста, і експерти, тому що це максимально важливо. Цей документ не може писатися там виключно якимось конкретним міністерством, або групою міністрів, або депутатською групою при всій повазі. Тому зараз працюємо в таких робочих групах, і у нас дуже широке обговорення, і в Давосі буде, і за кордоном, тому що у нас, ви абсолютно праві, ми як країна маємо відповісти і дуже чітко зрозуміти, який наш план, яка наша стратегія. Ми хочемо бути частиною європейської сім'ї, ми хочемо, як я сказала, мати доступ до ринків, ми хочемо, знаєте, це як ми всі, як і міністри, і люди, які займаються приватним бізнесом, але у всій голові має бути розуміння, яку країну ми будуємо. От коли у нас буде це загальне розуміння, нам буде легше вирішуватись якісь питання. Для нас другорядні речі не будуть мати, будуть менш важливі, ми будемо фокусуватися на нашій цілі. От допоки ми такий план, він не має бути там на 300 сторінок, це має бути зрозуміле абсолютно бачення нашої країни з розумінням того, які ми сфери розвиваємо, які у нас підходи, хто наші друзі з військової точки зору, якщо ми можемо так казати, тому що ми зрозуміли, що це питання дуже важливе наразі. Тому ми тут зараз якраз долучаємо всіх, хто хоче працювати. Я ділилася з колегами, у нас є робочі групи по розвитку малого, середнього підприємства, де 300 є експертів, 200. Тому у нас таке широке долучення громадськості саме для того, щоб, ви правильно кажете, випрацювали конкретний курс і там чітке розуміння для України, як ми рухаємося вперед, якими методами, які у нас цілі і хто ми є.
If I may, for the audience. So I would say that I would like to call it a recovery plan. That's the way I would like to call it. And sure, there has to be the main document is being written, and of course the society, we are working with the society to be able to influence that. We are now creating working groups, and even here in Davos, we have wide working groups already underway, and we need to focus on approaches, on areas to cover. We need to understand which markets we want to cover, and that doesn't have to be one plan covered by only one ministry. It doesn't have to be a plan for 300 pages, so to say. Excuse me.
Actually, it should be planned for one country, and it should be absolutely transparent and should be absolutely clear for.
Добрий день, в мене є конкретне запитання.
Можна англійською мовою запитатися?
So I have a specific question. I have a very concrete specific question. So Russians have destroyed Maria Primachenko, it's a Ukrainian artist, museum. That's the most famous Ukrainian artist, painter in the 20th century, who had influence on Picasso, Marco. Do we plan to somehow renovate Maria Primachenko's museum and to launch some, architecture which would influence not only architecture but also the culture? Thank you. And which are the specific steps to come to the result? Thank you.
Probably it's my question. I need to answer. Okay. All questions. Does it work? It's okay. So I think that it's very practical question that you raise. I think that recovery plan also should have stages, not only like early recovery and the post-war recovery, but it's also as we discussed with you. So it's also remains which from what region we should start with. And for your question you raise, of course we will recover all social infrastructure, cultural infrastructure that were destroyed. Absolutely obvious that now we need to recover the houses for people to return them back home. That's for sure. Of course, the next stage is going to be to recover the cultural and social institution that probably, it's definitely in our plan, but it should be at another stage because now we're just fully focused on that. And of course, as you know, mostly our European and United States partners are mostly focused on post-war recovery. I mean, that's why it's challenging for us to cover by our budget these early stages. That's why we're working on that and definitely we'll make it, but a little bit later.
One last question.
Okay, so yesterday we saw an amazing video that Minister Fedorov showed, Vision 2030, the vision of what Ukraine may look like after this recovery. I mean, it looked like a futuristic film. It was amazing. It was high-speed rail. It looked like iron domes over the major cities. It had so much technology, so much, green, incredibly futuristic-looking buildings. Is this what we're working towards? Is this a dream, or is this what the government is focused on and working towards?
It's what government is focused on. It's our vision, how we want, what kind of country we would like to see in 10 years, with a proper, as Misha showed, tax system we discussed, with a less government institution, with less ministries, cashless economy, that's for sure. So yes, it's our vision, it's our internal vision, and I like that you share it with us, and share this idea.
I've gotten the sign that the time has come to an end. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Torben Becker, Yuri Hornichenko, Jean Lang, Joseph Stiglitz, and Yulia Svyrydenko for a lively discussion on a topic that will be discussed many, many times over the next coming months and years. It's an urgent matter, and we have to address it in the proper priority to get Ukraine back where it should be and a new country of the future. But before I return and recess, I'd like to introduce two gentlemen. His Excellency Artem Rybchenko, the ambassador of Ukraine to the Swiss Confederation, and His Excellency Simon Pidu, the ambassador of the Swiss Confederation to Ukraine. Are they here?
I think it's somewhere outside.
Yeah, well, someone can find them. They wanted to speak. Right? They wanted to speak, so I wanted to give them the opportunity to speak at the end. But it's okay. Well, thank you for a very lively discussion. Very good.